direct warning to Russia from Britain in the House of Commons this afternoon, of a kind we have not heard before. It's particularly important because it throws a spotlight on what is probably our greatest national vulnerability, the network of undersea cables, more than 60 of them, which provide 95% of our internet and a lot of our energy. They are pretty easy to cut. Cables have been cut by Russian vessels in the Baltic, and the Defence Secretary John Healey told MPs today that a Russian spy ship, the Yantar, had been detected twice in British waters recently and was now being shadowed by Royal Naval vessels and RAF aircraft. He had authorised a British submarine to surface close to the Russian ship to ram the message to Vladimir Putin home.
We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
Now, ministers don't usually come to the Commons to talk about these kind of things, so this seems a potentially dangerous moment. To me, it is by far the most important story around tonight. It's the first duty of any government to protect this country, and Mr. Healey's statement comes just ahead of a strategic defence review being delivered to ministers by the former Secretary-General of NATO and Defence Secretary Lord George Robertson. And the huge question facing the Starmer government is whether they're prepared really to invest in rearming the UK to confront a much more dangerous world. And given the pressures on the economy, I am pretty sceptical. Indeed, the Russian ambassador in London told this programme late last year that although he thought Britain should rearm, the truth was we couldn't because we were too economically weak. Now, because this is not inherently a party political issue, let's hear first tonight from the former Conservative Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon. Sir Michael, would you agree that the vulnerability of our cables is the biggest single problem that we face in defence terms?
Well, it's the single most immediate problem, and we haven't had a threat as serious as this before. And as you've said, these cables, they go under the channel itself, carry our banking, they carry our energy, they carry our internet and all our financial data. If they were interrupted, if they were cut, we would soon notice it very quickly. It would directly affect a lot of our social and economic infrastructure. So this is a new level of threat from Russia, and I'm relieved that the military, the Navy, and the Secretary of State have met it square on.
I guess the question is whether we have the resources to track all the possible Russian ships and submarines and undersea devices which might go after them. I was talking to a Labour MP who said people think that the front line against Russia is in Ukraine and Central Europe. It isn't anymore, it's in the North Atlantic. Again, I wonder if you agree.
I do agree, and we've seen already cables being interrupted up in the Baltic. They've affected Finland. And we've seen previous years, we've had Russian ships kind of nosing around, but we haven't had this kind of direct challenge before. And it's a reminder to us all that we are, as an island, very vulnerable. And it's certainly a reminder to those carrying out the defence review that you've referred to. It's a reminder of just how important the Royal Navy is in defending our island. And it's a reminder that, that review must certainly include a re-examination of the size and readiness of the fleet that we have.
And while I've got you here, Michael, what's your view about the approach being taken by the new Trump administration? Because that appears to be increasing the threat to Western European security right at the moment that we're struggling to rearm to defend ourselves.
Well, there's no mystery about what Trump wants to do. He wants to bring that war in Ukraine to an end. And we all want it to end. Of course, nobody wants the killing to go on for a day longer than it needs to be. Trump has been very clear that he wants to get involved and he wants to end it. And he's made this pretty direct appeal now to Russia that you either do it the soft way or you do it the hard way. That, of course, is risky, but it's necessary. It really is necessary that we do force Russia to face up to the consequences now and accept that they're not going to get the whole of Ukraine back into the Russian orbit, and not least, one of those consequences is going to be a rearming of the NATO countries on quite a significant scale.
And on that, I said at the beginning this wasn't inherently party political. If the Conservatives were in power just now, you would have had a huge problem in trying to find the money to rearm to the extent that we may well have to do it. The same is true of Labour. What is your level of optimism or the opposite about the Strategic Defence Review? In other words, do you think we are going to see a step change of Britain's defences in the next year?
I'm sure that's those carrying out the defence review. I'm sure that's what they would want, because the threats have multiplied. Certainly since the previous reviews, we're in a more dangerous and more vulnerable position than we were. Now, it's perfectly true that we committed to spending 2.5%. We spend 2.3 at the moment. We said 2.5%. I think the Labour, I don't want to be too party political about this, but I hope the Labour government will now come off the fence and actually name their timetable for getting to the 2.5%. Nobody expects them to get to 2.5% within the next few months or even the next couple of years. But I think they do need, and President Trump will want to hear this, they do need to set a firm date by which we will get to 2.5%, because it's not impossible that Trump will ask NATO to go even further, perhaps to 3%.
Well, that is something I will now pursue with two sitting members of Parliament. Sir Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining me. So now to the Member of Parliament who chairs the Defence Select Committee, which holds the government to account on these kind of issues, the Labour MP for Slough, Tan Daisy. Tan, thank you very much for coming onto the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
First of all, you heard Sir Michael there, and many people feel the same, a sense of worry or unease that Labour will actually get to 2.5%, will actually set out a timetable. Are we going to see a timetable, do you think?
Look, in terms of 2.5%, that is something that I have said on the floor of the House to the Secretary of State for Defence, as well as indeed to the Prime Minister during the recent liaison committee meeting. My questioning for about 7 or 8 minutes centred around the need for clarity, the need for a timetable, and that is what I impressed upon the Prime Minister. I completely appreciate the fact that he has committed to that 2.5%, and we, I think, on a cross-party basis can agree to that. But the problem is, if we do not actually convey that to our allies, to our defence industrial base, where and when we are going to get to that position, then I think that that would be to our detriment.
So we need clarity on this. There's also been reports recently that this Strategic Defence Review, which I gather is pretty radical and very important under Lord George Robertson, is now being delayed possibly until the autumn. It was going to go to ministers this month. I think by the 13th of February was the deadline. But if it's going to be delayed until the autumn, that's really worrying.
Well, Lord Robertson, as the lead reviewer of the Strategic Defence Review, he and others have appeared before the Defence Committee giving evidence with regards to the SDR, but also during other conversations with him separately, including in this month. We are being constantly told that this will be in the first half of this year, and the Secretary of State has not said anything.
Okay, so you think it won't be? You think it probably won't be delayed?
Yeah, I think that the government realises the importance of this because of the various threats that we are facing. The Defence Committee, in fact, this week we had within our ongoing inquiry onto defence in the grey zone, the former head of the intelligence services, and also Dr. Trent from the Netherlands, the hybrid unit there. They were explaining to us about the increasing threats that we as a nation face. So I'm glad that you're actually discussing this, because that means that we are able to convey to the public the increasing level of threats, the aggression from Russia and elsewhere, and that's why we see also with regards to the undersea cables, which I questioned the Secretary of State on today, was that what are we doing to ensure that we are learning the lessons from what has happened with regards to Eagle S from Finland to Estonia, the undersea cables which Russia again is accused of dragging.
A Russian ship and I think a Chinese ship as well has been accused of dragging anchors through these cables.
And we need to make sure that we are actually using sanctions or other measures to stop these vessels from constantly coming into our waters and doing that intelligence and that recon, because that will be to our detriment. And as Sir Michael pointed out earlier, that if we do not stop this from happening, the undersea cables, that infrastructure there is critical to our way of life, to our commerce, to the way that information flows, not to mention defence.
I want to bring in another of your committee members just now, sits on the side of the Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells and an ex-military man himself, Mike Martin, because Mike, I think you have been looking particularly at this matter of undersea cables.
Yes, so I'm a member of the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, and we agreed with TAN, and we agreed on Monday that we are going to be looking at this matter because it is of critical importance, as everyone's outlined.
Yeah. Now, this joint committee, it's the Lords and the Commons. Let's just remind ourselves, Sir Michael alluded to it briefly, what it would mean for us if those cables or a large number of them were suddenly cut by undersea submersibles or whatever. Because this is, we'd lose our banking system, so we wouldn't be able to use...
Well, Andrew, what would your life be like if I took away your internet and your power?
Pretty exciting, actually. Exciting, interesting and different.
But think about
but for the entire country, it would be catastrophic.
It would be catastrophic.
And so in a sense, this would be, I say, a way of waging war without getting us to a nuclear threshold or taking the risks that a conventional attack would involve.
At the moment, it's a soft underbelly. I mean, Sir Michael alluded to that. Some of the other things, we've obviously got troops in Estonia, we're supporting Ukraine. There are lots of areas that we have looked at. The nature of the threat from Russia is that they are... it's in the nature of an autocracy. They're able to chop and change. They're not so worried about legalities. So they are able to look at it and go, oh, undersea cable's brilliant. That's weak. We can go for that.
And so in a sense, I guess what John Healey, the Defence Secretary, was saying today was we are prepared to ramp this up to a dangerous point. This is not going to be an easy thing for you to do.
He was saying that, and I was fully in support of the robustness of the response today. We surfaced a British submarine next to a Russian ship to make the point that we were watching them. And so that kind of signalling and robustness is exactly right.
And Tan, for people listening, that is quite an unusual and, relatively speaking, provocative thing for us to do.
Well, look, I don't think it's provocative. I think it's just laying out the truth. And that's why, on a cross-party basis in the House today, most of us were glad that the Secretary of State outlined what many of us in Parliament, especially those, as Mike was alluding earlier, whether it's in the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, whether it's in Defence, whether it's those that are on the Intelligence and Security Committee, that we need to actually get it out there.
Yeah.
And the only way to deal with a bully is to face them down. Russia only, I think, will understand the language of us in terms of coming from a position of strength, and that's the only way that they will stop some of this activity.
And Russia is our proximate threat. There's no doubt about that. Talking about this defence review, does that mean, Mike, for instance, that we are going to have to think about our defence in a different way? Perhaps stop being a post-imperial power that's sending aircraft carriers to the South China Sea that is involved in the defence of Australia and start to pull back to this part of the world and, talk about missile defence systems and so on, and be, in a sense, a little bit more selfish about our defence?
I think the big question that this defence review ducked was, are we do we consider ourselves a global expeditionary power, or are we a power that's concerned with security with allies in the Euro-Atlantic area? And just to look at some of these figures, we're talking about 2.5%. That's an increase of £4 billion of what we spend now every year. That won't do anything other than just plug the gaps that we have. To do Euro-Atlantic defence properly would require probably about 3% of GDP, and that's what we're going to be spending by the end of this Parliament. You can come back to me and ask me on that later on. And so to talk about 2.5%, which is what the government has said, that's the envelope for the review, and it's clear that we're still going to remain a global power. Our carrier group is going across the Indo-Pacific this year. It just doesn't make sense.
It's a fantasy. Tan, in the air, whenever I talk to politicians about this, they say, well, it's not either or. It is either or. We can't be a global power projecting aircraft carriers across the world and defend ourselves properly, can we?
Andrew, ultimately, it's about alliances. And I think our reliance on NATO, and whether it's now AUKUS, something that the Defence Committee will be looking into, the Global Combat Air Programme, a joint initiative with Japan and Italy, there are various alliances, and it's only through strengthening those alliances that we will be able to defend ourselves better. In terms of NATO, I'm glad that we are showing that leadership to say we will reach that 2.5%. And if we see whether it's President-elect Trump, he's now recently been speaking about 5%. I know that if reports are to be believed, certain internal figures within the MOD thinking about 3%. 2.6%. But either which way, whatever figure we get to, we need to get some of our other allies to ensure that they too are spending the right amount on defence.
We may not like it, but this